and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. I am joined, as always, by my not colleague, but superhero, James Anir. My name is Sam. We're both absolutely thrilled that you've taken time out to watch or listen with us today. So, James, before we get started, how are you? How were your holidays?
I am very well. Our holidays were interesting. We traveled, and it wasn't very much fun. So we came home early, and so we had a nice restful week. And then we had an intensive last week that was remarkable. So we really enjoyed doing that and helping that person.
That's fantastic. My holidays were great. Had a wonderful time. And for those of you that are watching and listening, we get lots of people that reach out to us for help. And James and Sharon do intensives for individuals and couples. And if you are looking for an intensive, look no further before at least doing a consultation with James and Sharon to see if you are a fit for them and if they're a fit for you. Today, we're going to have a discussion as we launch into the new year. That is a very poignant discussion and a very needed discussion. Today's discussion is talking about signs the unfaithful is still using the betrayed. Now, before we get into the signs, James, what is the unfaithful using the betrayed for?
Well, a lot of things, but basically their unmet needs. So things that they were missing in childhood and through their young adulthood and such, that essentially they were looking to have those met by somebody else. And so their partners can feel really used about that. It really comes down to that selfishness that partners feel from us unfaithful. Uh,
And it opens up a can of worms, and we've never really ceased to open up and discuss the can of worms that focus on infidelity, betrayal, trauma. And I wouldn't want to do it with anybody else. I am honored that we get to open up these cans of worms because when there's betrayal, part of betrayal trauma is the fact that the betrayed may feel like they were never really loved at all and that they were just being used to satisfy the needs, the desires of the unfaithful, right?
yeah, and I mean, to an extent, that's true because we all have these needs. Every human being has these needs and tends to partner with somebody that they feel can provide those. Certainly, it is an unconscious way of bonding. And that's the problem, is that we need to make it conscious so that we can actually have partners together as a couple who are not looking to do that, are not looking for what does my partner bring to the table versus who they are. And that's really the important piece because if it is what they bring to the table, they do feel used, and rightfully so. And so we need to be looking at how do we make the other part of that, the latter part, loving them for who they are without what can they do for us involved in it. Getting to that place 100% is probably not human, but getting to there in that 90th percentile is. So we absolutely can do that. And obviously in relationships, there's a give and take as far as what we each bring to the table. But if it's based in that, then it's not really a relationship. There's a why to this. Why do partners feel used? So that part of the answer was really solid, and there are some specifics to this that are really helpful. When we do those sorts of behaviors, we're sending a very clear message when we act the way that we did when we were having an affair. Really, actually early on, as soon as we started putting our emotional and or sexual intimate energy outside of our committed relationship, it tells our partners that we're in a relationship with them only to meet those needs. And worse, that we never cared about them or loved them to begin with. Now, most of us unfaithfuls don't believe that because, we feel like, yeah, well, I do love my wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or however somebody's relationship looks. But when we make a really honest appraisal, like a reality check of how we've behaved, especially beyond our obvious acting out, and focusing on how we've treated our partners in our relationship, I think then we can and need to see the truth of the impact of those less obvious behaviors.
Because there are not so subtle behaviors that we really have to discuss, right?
Yeah, those are really the underlying wounds that cause the behaviors, those childhood or young adulthood needs that get exacerbated through life until you reach this point where you're so separate in terms of how you're viewing the relationship that it's constantly endangered. Sometimes it's because you're in conflict with yourself because of your actions where you've stepped so far outside of your integrity, it's bothering you. It's creating anxiety in you, internal conflict. And often it's because of those early experiences that still drive our behaviors, but those need to be discovered and addressed. And that's the not so subtle part, but also the very subtle part of this. And so it's these layers of work that need to be done.
One of those layers, we talked about this off camera, one of those layers can be called, and I'm sure every betrayed partner or spouse will resonate with this verbiage, and that's emotional detachment.
Yeah, we've talked about this also in a few other podcasts, the emotional avoidance, intimacy avoidance, all the way to anorexia. And we talked about it in terms of it being sort of intimacy adversity, right? And that intimacy adversity really makes it a little less of sort of a blade that is hitting us so we can accept that. Yeah, I have some adversity in this area, and then it's a challenge rather than a flaw. The problem with emotional detachment is that, of course, it hurts the person that we're in relationship with. So one of the first parts of that is distancing and isolation. And you got to think about how that lands because this is all about impact. It's all about how a partner feels treated. So how does it land? A partner's going to perceive that we're not even there, except maybe in person and in physical body, if we've hung around to be present, but we're not
Right.
present. It's really whether we're there mentally and emotionally. What it does is it pushes that hand out like the stiff arm. It keeps a partner at a distance. And our actions might make a partner feel like we don't care about them or that they don't matter in our life. Second part of that distancing and isolation is really a lack of emotional connection and intimacy because nothing says you don't care deeply about me than a lack of emotional intimacy. If we don't have that willingness to try to be vulnerable with emotions, to at least try to be emotionally intimate. We don't have to be perfect at it. It's actually that effort. Remember when I talked about the insula in the brain? It's this thing that has five ridges to it. And the part that's about self-awareness and empathy and creativity and emotional connection is about 60% smaller in men. Now, guys, that is not an excuse to say, oh, well, see, huh? It's 40% less than you. So, what do you expect?
Right.
No, it's not like that. It's really of that 60%, we're using such a small amount, like 5%. What if we doubled that? You double anything, that's quite a lot. It's
Yeah.
noticeable. So I think that's really important to bear in mind that this is incremental work. This doesn't have to be, oh, well, I'm going to go over to the wall and switch on and it's going to go from dark to the full-on stadium lights. That can't happen that way because you have no practice at it. So the courage to do this is big. You've got to be able to do that in order to at least grow that, even that little 5% bit. So that's that willingness to be vulnerable and to try at it. You don't have to be suddenly this amazingly emotionally vulnerable person. It's the working at it that is the important part. If we don't do that, that lack of connection and intimacy feels to the betrayed as if we're just checkboxing the key parts of our relationship that have very deep meaning to our partner, which says what? I don't really care
Right.
whether I do or not. It's how our partner receives that and not sharing ourselves as a clear statement to our partner, whether it's statement of intent or not. That also says, I don't really care much about what you think or how you feel. or how you change as a person. Another part of the distancing and isolation is not collaborating. So making decisions on things that affect both partners and acting on them on my own, that's certainly going to make my partner feel dismissed. You have to be inclusive. It may be a bit scary to be inclusive, but that's just part of being in a partnership. Another part of it is apparent disinterest in our partner's well-being. I'm talking emotionally, and it can go to physically and mentally, right? When we don't lovingly consider our partner in the decisions we're making or in any situation, really, where emotions are concerned, it always sends a message that we don't care about their emotional well-being and we don't consider them important enough or equal to us because we are putting our own needs and desires ahead of theirs. And that can look a few ways: ignoring our partner's issues, not anticipating when something might impact them negatively, making light of their problems because we put our needs and wants ahead of theirs. And that lack of care for our partner's well-being can make them feel unimportant and like they don't matter.
So what we're talking about is there's always a red flag when the words and actions of us as an unfaithful just don't match. We can say whatever we want to say, but what every betrayed wants, and I say this in my coaching practice to people all the time, the only currency that we unfaithful have, the only currency of any value is our actions. And I might have stolen some of that from this bald-headed dude who's really smart. But the only currency we have are actions. Because you can say, and we're used to being really good talkers, most of us unfaithful. The fact is, talk is not what the betrayed wants. They want and they need actions, right?
Oh, absolutely. They want and need actions, and those have to match what we're saying. Otherwise, as you were saying, it's just all this, and that doesn't mean anything. We've talked and talked and talked. When we break down the words and actions that don't match, there are a few categories here. One that I'd like to talk about is, and we'll do a full podcast on push pull, but the push and pull about our relationship. So alternatingly professing our deep love for our partners and then questioning, resenting, pulling away emotionally. It sends such mixed messages that are contradictory. They will confuse our partners and make them wonder about our level of commitment, which does what to them? Again, it puts them on uncertain ground. That is the
Right.
last thing a betrayed partner needs, is to feel uncertain, unsure, like the ground isn't solid, like it could give way at any time. Again, because it's happened enough, maybe they're finding a little bit of solid ground under them now, and this kind of thing puts them back on that uncertain ground and they don't need to be there anymore. We're supposed to be helping our partners heal, not the other way around. So another part of this, words and actions that don't match, no follow through on promises. Broken promises continue the cycle of betrayal. Breaking a promise leads to unreliability, unpredictability, and that is not something our partners need. Those are the opposites of being a solid, loving, considerate partner, which is what they need. The difference between what we say and do leaves a betrayed actually feeling, these are big words here, feeling conned and lied to, which replicates two of the deeply negative emotional conditions that they have felt since betrayal. And remember, I defined betrayal as taking that intimate energy or sexual energy, either one or both, emotional, outside of the partnership. That's really where betrayal starts. And so that's pre-discovery. So feeling conned and lied to, they may not have been able to identify it leading up to Discovery Day, but it's been there. So when Discovery Day happens, there's this, oh man, this has been happening all this time. Now it's replicating that again.
Because when the betrayed feel any sort of mixed messages or mixed signals, it absolutely disrupts their nervous system. But what does that look like? What does mixed signals kind of look like?
Feeling off balance and undermined, it really comes down to it's not what we say, it's how we act. So act
Right.
close and loving and then distant and or angry or cold and so on. That's an emotional roller coaster for the betrayed. It makes it difficult for them to identify their own feelings because what is accurate here? I was thinking this or I was feeling this, and suddenly that's gone. So something was wrong. So something I'm doing or I'm perceiving is off. And that just isn't true. They're wanting to trust and they're giving you trust, and then you pull back emotionally. Now, I'm not saying there aren't underlying reasons that we do that. It's our job, though, to become aware of those, and that might take some deep work, will probably, with somebody who knows how to get us there. And it's so important because otherwise, what ends up happening is all these things that I'm saying that we're continuing to do this to our betrayed, even if we're not intending to at this point. This all undermines the overall the relationship stability as well as that trust building.
Be- Whenever I think a betrayed feels a lack of support, it's going to not just trigger them, but upset them and create instability, unpredictability, and fear. And why would they not feel that? But what does that's kind of the big 10,000 foot, a lack of support. Okay, well, for the unfaithful that might be listening and going, well, okay, Sam, how do I become a better supporter? What is this mysterious support that you speak of? Because so many times we unfaithful are like, I can't be someone I'm not. I'm not this, I'm not that. Okay, well, what are some things that they can do to authentically support their partner?
If we look at how it's going to land on a partner or how they're going to perceive it, that might be really helpful in order to think about what we can do. So it looks like we're unwilling to be loving and empathetic. Now, I'm hoping that's not true. I'm hoping there's a willingness, there's just a I don't know how. And so the first thing you got to do is get curious. How? Other people are managing this. You got to believe that you can do it and that it's not impossible. You've not known it before, so it's something new, but we have all learned how to do things, even as old dogs, so to speak. So no matter what our reasons, whether we can see them or they're buried for not appearing willing to listen or be compassionate or help or be a shoulder to lean on, it leaves our partners feeling that they're undermined and feeling that we are our old self-centered selves. So if you think about what I just said, we have to learn how to listen. Sometimes that's just staying in the same room and pulling ourselves back into the present moment. We talked about active listening, so asking questions, getting curious, those sorts of things to be able to really clearly show that we're listening. And the only way to clearly show that is to actually listen. And things like asking questions mean we're engaged. So if our partners are feeling that we are engaged, that's a whole different wonderful ball of wax. Another thing that is difficult when they're going through difficult times, even if it's not related to us and we're not there, that's a problem. If we aren't there when our partners need us most, which is usually because they're in some sort of pain, emotionally, sometimes it's physically. That's where whatever our fears are, or whatever's stopping us, we need to overcome those and be there. Because what does it do if we don't? It undermines their trust and their belief that we care. So physically absent, emotionally absent, those things are things that we have to work to do differently. The way it comes off, ultimately, if it happens again and again and again, is that we want to avoid our partners and certainly their pain when they are not in their best space, like they're the plague. I say it that way, and I'm emphasizing it because it's sort of a cliche to say, I avoid that like the plague. Think about the plague. I mean, that's how a partner feels is, wow, is there something that seriously wrong with me? So we
Mm-hmm.
have to make that effort to connect. It may be hard. It may be something that we just have never exercised those muscles. So it may be very difficult. We have to do it and we have to be as consistent as we can because if we don't, it says we don't care enough to hold their pain and don't want to help, leaving our partners desperately alone and wounded.
Are we talking about selfishness at the core? Because, I mean, we are experts in selfishness as unfaithful, right?
Well, we're self-centered, and I'm going to say this because I don't want this to come off as an unfaithful bashing. We have reasons for that. And they're typically because we didn't get those needs met when we were children. And so what happens is we end up staying in that same mode where we're constantly trying to draw what we need towards us or find that. And so that means that focus, whether we know it or not, is still on us. So
Yeah.
selfish, I like the word self-centered because that really says, okay, it's revolving around me. And it doesn't have to because we can learn to meet our own needs. And that's what we have to do. Here's the deal with self-centeredness and lack of empathy, because that's how it comes off, is that if we do not move outside of ourselves, both in our thoughts and our feelings, our actions and behaviors are always going to default to what was best for us as a child, because that is what we've brought with us. It's gone from need to desperation. And we can fool ourselves into thinking that we're actually being pretty open and being pretty vulnerable and being pretty present, and yet we're not. So we have to get that reality check because what it does is it leaves our partners feeling undervalued or not valued at all. And here's a really big hint. If you're feeling the need to defend how you're acting or what you're doing, you're probably guilty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point.
If you want to give your partner a clear sign you're using them, don't be there when they need you. Don't be ready in an instant to listen, to attend to their feelings, whether of pain or happiness. Either of those are going to really give that message. Did you notice there I said, attend to your partner's feelings, whether they are of pain or happiness, because they matter no matter what they're feeling, and they need to be shown that. One thing that we haven't done is shown them enough. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not hard to be attentive. And boy, when they're happy, how much joy can we feel for them feeling happiness?
Well, I think we didn't put this in the notes, but there is this little, what we call a factor. There is the want to factor. At the end of the day, do you want to do this? Because if you do, it's going to shine through at some level. And if there is the want to, it might be muddy and it might be less than perfect. It might be even really wonky, but at least you want to, because there's a big difference between someone who wants to and someone who is trying to manipulate their partner. And that's another factor that we have to talk about is the manipulative behavior of the unfaithful.
This is another one of those not so subtle behaviors. The first one is playing mind games. Now, this sounds deliberate and very often is. It may be reactive deliberate. So I'm feeling like there's an arrow being slung at me or something like that. Whether that's true or not, if the reaction is to then try to confuse or plant doubt or deny our partner's feelings, that is flat out a power play, which tells you what? I'm not just saying that in an accusatory way. A power play says, I don't feel like I have any control over this situation. So how do we react? We try to create control. So we have to be aware of ourselves. That's part of growing that part of the brain that we may not have or be using much of right now. So am I doing these things means I don't feel like I have control. So that means we've got to look at what do I have control of? Which is actually, from our standpoint anyway, a fairly simple answer. When you're in the midst of it, it's not. And the simple answer is I have control over how I act. I have control over how I try to connect. I have control over making sure that my partner feels heard, seen, understood, loved, all of those things. I have control over that. We actually have much more control than when we're in reaction, we might think we have. Staying aware of that's really important. Power plays aren't love, they're not equal, and it's most often a defense, whether we're doing it purposefully or we're unaware of it. The damage is actually the same. And I'm going to use another strong word here. When we do a power play like that, confuse, plant doubt, deny our partner's feelings, we are annihilating them. Annihilate comes literally from the word nihilism, which means to negate something or to make it
Mhm.
not exist. So that is literally trying to negate who they are. I don't think that there's one amongst us, I hope not, that would want that. I'm using very strong language to try to motivate. I don't know. That's not me. I don't want to do that. Here's the thing. We get to prove it. We're being given another chance, and we get to prove that we're not that. If we do it, it leaves our partner questioning themselves, feeling mentally, emotionally drained, unsure of anything, and just absolutely tired, flat out
Yeah.
exhausted. Another part of manipulative behavior, using guilt to get what we want. That again is about control. It's trying to guilt somebody into something or to create or control an outcome to try to get what we want. And frankly, it's exploitation. It can look like trying to make our partners feel responsible for our emotional well-being, or when we're unhappy that our partners are somehow to blame, which is emotional blackmail because we use it to play on our partner's feelings and take advantage of their current unsteadiness. And betrayal caused insecurities to get them to shift and feel like they're the ones who are wrong. Obviously, again, is that something that we really want to do? It sounds awful. It is awful, but we do have control over whether we do it or not.
Now, it's funny, all under the banner of manipulation, we can also be very controlling and possessive as unfaithful, which massively confuses the betrayed, right?
What confuses them, it also makes them feel misunderstood, unseen, and actually trapped when we try to manipulate our partner's feelings and control what they do. So let's say, okay, I'm going to be in a bad mood if you do this or don't do this. And I demonstrate that. I may not think it, but I demonstrate it by if you do this or don't do this, I'm in a bad mood. Who would want that? They're going to do what they can to avoid.
Yeah.
Or maybe if they do something like that, I'll make life hell for them. Well, of course, that just naturally leads the partner to actually just change their behaviors or do something that's out of their own best interest. This is otherwise known as subjugation in order to avoid that reaction or to get a better reaction. And we do it so that we don't have to feel uncomfortable or deal somehow or give up our control over the situation or over our partners. All of that comes from our own insecurities, which insecurities stem from what? Unmet childhood needs, things that we never resolved, and so on. There's another part of this, getting jealous of our partner's time and attention. I used to do that with our kids. That can happen with kids. It can happen with partners' friends. They're spending time with friends. What we also can do, which I also did, was project our own cheating behaviors onto our partners, like they're going to cheat on us. Like 99% of the time, partners are so hurt by this because they would never do that. Yet we
Right.
ascribe it to them. Why? Because we're projecting ourselves onto them because we can't tolerate that loss of integrity or that conflict that we have inside. When we do that, we're actually saying, you are my possession. And as long as you're doing what I want, rather than me meeting you as an equal in the middle, all is going to be okay and settled. But it's not because guess what? They're giving up who they are. That's not a partnership. How many times have you heard, well, she makes me feel like less of a man, or I'm a grown man and stuff. She can't do that stuff. It feels like our manhood is threatened if we're men. And really, what that means is my fragile image of myself feels like it's about to break. That may end up looking like we're trying to control our partner's actions or actually trying to control their actions, their decisions, even their relationships outside of our marriage, their friendships, and so on. Finding fault with them or where their past actions have felt unjust to us or impact us negatively, comparing them to our own betrayal of them is a way to stomp them down and silence them rather than relating to them and finding new relational ground and creating space for them to be who they are and make their own choices.
I love the part about new relational ground. I love the idea that we can be trying to heal from infidelity and going through the restorative process individually as well as relationally or maritally and still gain new relational ground because this whole process is taking a lot of work from the unfaithful if they're doing it, but it's taking a lot from the betrayed as well to try and do this. So we have the beautiful, and you say, Sam, beautiful. It is beautiful because you have two people who are broken, obviously because of the choices of one, who are trying to find new relational ground, who are digging deep into the inner resources that they didn't even know they had to find new relational ground that can be very beautiful. No, it's not perfect, and no, it's not the way you wanted it, but there is so much grace and beauty and glory to be found by this work. We talk about this all the time that if they are watching and listening to us, and if they are able to stay with us, we don't pretend to be perfect. We sure don't at any level believe we're perfect. We're just doing the best that we can. But if they make it this far in the podcast, we have to believe that he or she are trying to actually give their relationship a chance, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of our basic assumption in doing this is that the unfaithfuls out there don't want to be that guy or that person. Otherwise, I reckon you wouldn't be here watching this. And that means that you no longer want your partner to feel as though they're just a tool for you to get your needs met or get what makes you comfortable. And so we do make that basic assumption here because otherwise this isn't going to work. With that in mind, how do I do this? And overall is follow your heart and get it into your head and heart that your partner is worthy of being with someone who loves and cares for them. Realize that you are very capable of being that person. This may seem foreign, but you are very capable of doing it with a strong enough desire to look deeply at yourself and why these actions and mindsets seem so entrenched as to be a default. You actually can change everything. It requires someone who's wiser and more experienced than you are to help you. But none of us, until we learn, can see our own forest for our trees. To do this, though, it's vital to recognize that the tactics that we've outlined today, whether they're conscious and deliberate or that you're blind to them, is critical to comprehend the reality of how you're continuing to betray your partner.
That's strong verbiage. But if you're an unfaithful male or female, ask yourself, do you want to continue to betray your partner or do you want to get healthy? Because if you have a heart to learn, that's a big deal. Are you willing to learn, whether it's from someone like us or somebody out there in the universe that's doing the same type of work and maybe they're doing it better? But do you have a willingness to learn or do you think that you know it all? And number two, how's your want to factor? How bad do you want this? Because if you want it, I think, James, you and I could say from personal experience, when we started to want it, it wasn't as hard as we had been telling ourselves it was because we decided that we actually wanted it. It was still hard. Absolutely, it's hard, but it's possible. But if you don't want it, everything's hard. Filling out a PDF or opening a PDF is hard because you don't want it, right?
Yeah, I had to set up this microphone today. I was having so much trouble. but I really liked how the other microphone that's up in Tennessee still sounded. So I was like, I've got to get this thing working. I had to watch a YouTube. Used to be I could just hook wires up and, and it would work. And now I have to watch YouTubes for the simplest things. But hey, it meant enough to me for me to do it. So here we are listening to really good audio.
Well, and that's the principle. So how bad do you want it? And you may not even know if you want it, which is fair, but how bad do you want to know what you want? Because at the end of the day, for the unfaithful, it comes down to that. We'd love for you to like and follow our page. If we can help, please remember we cannot do therapy or coaching over email, but we might be able to make some suggestions. Or if you want to inquire about an intensive or inquire about coaching with me, just reach out to us at Ask the Unfaithful. Now, we're going to continue this new year and continue to go deeper because, on behalf of James and myself, we want this. We want to do this. We want to support you. We want to help you. We know how hard and awful this can be to try and save the relationship, or if you are heading towards singlehood and divorce, we know how difficult that process is, and we walk people through that process literally every day. We're honored that you would spend this time with us. We'll see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.